One of the topics we get the most questions on every year is cover crops, especially in these last 3 to 5 years. The cover crop thing has just exploded. Why do you think that is, Darren?
Well, there are certainly a lot of benefits from cover crops, and when you think about it, if we can reduce erosion, we can potentially reduce compaction. If we can hold nutrients in place in the field, those are all good things. The positives of cover crops are really good.
They are, but see, here's the thing that I think is driving this the most. Everybody is talking about soil health. Everybody says, boy, if you have a healthier soil, then everything's going to work out great for you. And cover crops are the key. Well, I don't look at cover crops as the key at all. I look at them as another tool. Yes, cover crops can be important, they can be beneficial, but you can't neglect everything else that's going on in your farm. So all I'm trying to say here is we're going to talk today about the benefits of cover crops, and that's great. But don't be thinking, well, all I need to do is put some cover crops in and my yields are going to be fantastic and everything's going to be perfect. My soil is going to be the healthiest ever. It's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of effort in other ways too, besides just putting those cover crops in the ground.
The benefits of cover crops are well documented, but I want to talk about some of the issues that people had this year. When we look at a cool spring where it was tough for guys to get out there, it was tough to get the burn down done. We saw some issues with insects, for example, and it's one of those things that you do have to be prepared for. A lot of the guys that are doing cover crops now are actually in conventional till. The no-till guys, they've adapted cover crops in many cases. They're used to what's going on with lots more residue out in the field. The conventional till guys, they're not. If you're going from, hey, I want to see that field black in the spring, to all of a sudden, hey, I've got all this cover crop growth out there and I'm going to seed right into it, it's a whole different situation. One of the things that popped up this year in some areas was slugs. Slugs can be a big time issue, especially if you've got lots of cover and you've got some moisture. The other thing is other insects like armyworms, for example. So we saw more calls at our Ag PhD radio show from guys that are putting cover crops in for the first time, or maybe they've just done it for a couple of years, saying, what do I do about these bugs? I've got all these bugs out there and I want to seed my crop in. I don't want the bugs just to mow my crop off. So it's something to think about if you're putting cover crops in, that insects could be an issue, slugs could be an issue.
Yeah, along those same lines, I look at disease. There could be issues with disease, especially if you don't pick the right cover crop. In other words, over the years, we've typically rotated corn and soybeans. Why do we do that? Because corn is a grass crop, soybeans are a broadleaf crop. What do we always tell you with cover crops? We'd like to see you put a grass and a broadleaf out there, and maybe something that's going to go with deep roots like a turnip or radish. So now you've got several different species out there. Are we really rotating crops now? I don't think so. So that's one of the reasons we see more insects, we see more disease problems. There are some issues with cover crops. So yes, I love cover crops in the fact that we can reduce weed pressure. We can absolutely save soil and reduce erosion. We can break up some compaction. We can build organic matter in the soil. We can have some more forage for livestock. All those things are great. But what we're trying to say here is, anytime you're going to make a major change to your farm, like adding cover crops, you got to immediately start scouting more. You've got to immediately start thinking more, all right, how is this going to change my entire system? And it may require you to invest more money in your actual crop, in insecticide, in fungicide, in scouting, all these types of things. Things are going to change. That's the one thing that I can promise you. Things are going to change, mostly for the good with cover crops, but there might be a little bit for the bad as well.
I've got two last observations to make from this spring. One is weed control. Where we've got well-established cover crops, we definitely saw less pressure from mare's tail and some of the winter annual weeds that have been a real problem for many farmers across the country. The other thing is areas that were too wet. If they had a well-established cover crop, we saw that cover crop pulling in that excess moisture, and it allowed farmers to get out in those fields a little sooner. So that was a good thing. It could also be a bad thing in areas that were too dry, when the cover crop didn't get burned off early enough, whether it was in the fall or early enough in the spring. We did see some moisture loss in some of those areas that definitely has to go into the planning for next year.
Well, let's take that a step further. That's the reason I don't love cover crops in the western corn belt unless they're killed off early in the fall, is they're sucking moisture out. It's the same thing if you leave your alfalfa out there and you want to kill it off in the spring. You've already lost a bunch of moisture. In the western corn belt, you can't afford to do that. So just make sure you're getting that cover crop killed off in the fall and maybe even early in the fall if you're in a dry area.
And don't think we're against cover crops, because we're certainly not. We harvested wheat this summer, and immediately following the combine was the drill putting in our cover crop. We definitely see the benefit of having a cover crop in the field. It's just important as you make big changes on your farm to try and adapt to those changes, get out in the field more, keep an eye on things, and make observations and changes going into future years.
One of the things we hope you don't see is our Weed of the Week, but if you do, we'll tell you how to stop it coming up next.